all that sticky stuff that makes people feel connected, makes people feel engaged, makes people feel focused. We're just not talking about that. This is the Leadership Foundry Podcast. I'm your host, Braden Smith. And joining us this week is my wonderful producer and colleague, Whitney Mendoza. Whitney, how are you?
Good, Brandon. How are you?
I'm well. I am excited about our topic today. Well, let me rephrase that. I'm not so much excited as much as I am passionate.
Ooh.
Or maybe even a little upset. And I'm going to tell you why. Because the topic we're going to cover today on the show is something that if we went back in time 10 or 15 years ago, leaders would be talking about this. This would be one of the topics that would be addressed in any leadership offsite, in any leadership coaching session. I mean, we would be talking about this stuff all the time. You pick up any Harvard Business Review, and there would be an article, at least one, on this topic. And in the last 4 years since the pandemic, none of my clients are talking about this. And it's not, I'm not faulting anybody, but it's representative of the fact that this just isn't where our head's at. Okay, so that was a really long tease and setup. Here's the topic: culture. Now, before folks get all upset and say, Brandon, we talk about culture. We've been talking about culture since the pandemic. I want to clarify something. Talking about where people work, whether they work at home or come into the office, or how many days a week they come into the office, or mandatory days in the office, that's talking about where people are working. That's not really talking about culture. So when I'm talking about culture, I'm talking about things like purpose, vision, mission, values, all that sticky stuff that makes people feel connected, makes people feel engaged, makes people feel focused. We're just not talking about that. So what I thought would be a good use of our time today is to start talking about that and reminding leaders this needs to be one of our key priorities for the remainder of 2024. So that's what we're going to take on today, Whitney.
Perfect. And I'm really glad you opened it the way that you did open it, Brandon, because one of the things, just as we were gearing up and kind of talking about what we wanted to share today on the show, I was thinking, it's really great that you started out naming off what culture isn't, so that we can fully understand what culture is, because I feel, and let me know if this is where this is coming from, but I feel like we kind of just had a disjointed couple of years. We went through a thing we've never been through before, and I think that we're still recovering from that in a lot of different ways, and it almost feels like we forgot how to do culture, like we just forgot how to do it. We forgot what it was.
Yeah, and I think the other part about the culture topic and conversation, which is so challenging, is that it is a little touchy-feely. It's a little abstract. And in some cases, it's a little future-focused, like purpose or vision. And so why that becomes challenging is, and I'm going to actually call out, in a general sense, leadership today. When we go into times of challenge, it's when we should lean on our culture. It's our identity. It's who we say we are. And yet, how many companies and leaders threw that stuff out the window, stopped talking about it, and said, we need to figure out how to stabilize our revenue. We need to get our costs under control. We need to figure out how to bring employees back. They've thrown out the stuff that they said was kind of true to who they are. And the irony in all this is, you're going to fix some of your revenue issues if you have a really strong, compelling culture. The companies that have the strongest, most compelling cultures, the ones that preach it all the time, when you track their performance in downtimes, they outperform their competitors. In many cases, their revenue goes up when all their competitors' revenue goes down, because a really strong, compelling culture will connect to your customers. It's why your customers like doing work with you. And it's why they want to keep coming back to doing work with you, so they don't leave you in tough times. You see that with a lot of businesses that have that sticky culture. And it's one of the solutions to bringing folks back in the office, because, yeah, it's like, I want to go hang out with people that I resonate with. We share the same values. We share the same identity and purpose. It helps us to bring that a little more of that engagement and connectivity back.
Yeah.
And Whitney, I know you're about to say something.
Yeah, no, this was reminding me of conversations we had with a couple of recent guests. I know Andreas Widmer had mentioned this. Chester Elton really highlighted that was a common factor is strong relationships make for a happy life. And so if we have strong relationships at work, to your point, that's going to encourage us to come back because we actually want to be around those people. Also, when we feel valued, we express that value towards others through the level of service we provide and the quality of our work.
Absolutely. And we stick around, which means that's a relationship that stays connected to those customers. I mean, think about some of the businesses that you and I enjoy going to. We love it when we're seeing the same people year after year, and they get to know us, and we feel more of a connection. We feel like they actually care about us. It's not just a transaction. Now, that's not to say that transactional businesses like Amazon, for example, that's a great example of a classic super transactional business. They're not into relationships. I mean, if you talk to any Amazon executive, if they're honest, they're going to tell you the same thing. That's not one of their value propositions. It's speed, convenience, and price. And if they can automate all that, they will. But though even those values can be sticky. I mean, a lot of us, if not all of us, use Amazon in some form or another for those reasons. So it's about really aligning your organization around a set of common, as I'd like to put it, kind of guiding ideas. That's really what we're talking about here. So yeah, that's going to be the thing that we need to start talking about with our teams in 2024.
So what does this look like?
I'm so glad you asked that, Whitney. I was hoping you would ask that, Whitney. Whitney, that set me up so perfectly well.
Good.
So let's start with the basic backbones of culture. So when we talk about it, I mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to be I'm going to reiterate it, but in a more organized way. So when we talk about guiding ideas statements, the things that help us form culture, there are really 4 classic ones. And they go kind of order from highest altitude to ground floor. So at our highest altitude, that's a purpose statement. That's our why. That's the need in the world we are trying to meet as an institution or organization or company. And ideally, it's a need that's always going to be out there. We're always going to strive for it. We're going to strive to bring people happiness, right? Or strive to make people's lives better. Whatever it happens to be, that's our purpose statement. And it's our North Star, helps us guide decisions. Okay. That's our compelling why. Okay. So that's our 30,000-foot view. Ideally, that never changes. We may change our business model, change our services and products, but that one always stays right there. Okay. If we go down a notch, then we might be into what we would call a vision statement. And the vision statement, the backbone or mechanisms of a vision statement is that you have a metric, some kind of goal that is attached to a point in time. We want to be number 1 in market share by the end of 2025. We want to be $5 billion in revenue by 2030. We want to have a 0 footprint and be sustainable by 2035. Whatever it is, you've got a measurable goal attached to a point in time. That's a vision statement. And if we do it right, we're going to achieve that, and then we're going to get a new one. But it gives us a goal that we can go after. Then we have a mission statement, which isn't as common these days. It's essentially like a paragraph that says, this is what it means to be us. Almost like a mantra. Okay. Again, not as common these days. What it's often replaced with, that I frankly prefer, is values. The 3 to 5 guiding values, which basically indicate to the members of the organization, this is how we operate. It's how we treat each other. It's how we treat our customers. And it's how we approach work. That's typically what values statements are about. So like excellence, customer service, responsiveness, those are all equality. Those are all examples. So that's the backbone. Now, here's the wonderful, great news for anyone who's listening. The organizations that have the best, most effective cultures, they typically pick 2 out of the 4. You don't want all 4. And there's a real reason for that. If you have all 4, and we've all seen those organizations, they think more is better. And what happens is no one can remember anything.
Right.
No one remembers all the values because there's a value statement and there's a mission statement and there's a vision statement and there's a purpose statement and there's probably a couple other things that the leadership teams come up with. There's all these floating culture statements out there. No one remembers any of them. So you want them to be more finite and concrete so people can remember them. You want them to be sticky. You want people to be able to talk about them and share them. That's why when you heard me say earlier, it wasn't a loose comment when I said 3 to 5 values. It wasn't like I was picking a number out of the air. You shouldn't have more than 5. You have more than 5 values, people don't forget number 6 and number 7, number 8. They just forget them all. Okay, it's too many. So you really need 3 to 5. And some of the most effective organizations, like if we pulled out Disney, for example, and Magic Kingdom, they've got 4. They teach all their employees, that they call cast members, 4 values. And so we want to make sure that it's a concrete and kind of a narrow list, which sounds easy. But once you start to list off the stuff that's important to you, you come up with 7, 8, 9, 10 really quickly. So narrowing it down to 3 to 5 is hard, but that's the power in it, because we want to make sure they are not only true to who we are and who we want to be, but they're repeatable and they're memorable.
Very nice. I love that. Yeah, that was kind of something I was thinking of, because I'm going to tee you up for another question. But what are some ways that we can help our team members remember this, right? Like is it like motivational posters on the wall? What's kind of going on to help us remember
I think
these?
everyone should have a picture of, like a cat, like dangling from like some rope or something.
This says perseverance.
Persevere, hang on, so you can do that. And there's some creative ways to use that. I'll give you great examples. I've had organizations name their meeting rooms a different value.
Okay.
So it's a way to kind of symbolize this is the integrity room. That's the excellence room. So it's a reminder that way. I've seen really creative murals painted on the walls with values. All that stuff's great because you're kind of putting it into the water. You're putting it into the air, which again is great when folks are in the office. However, the best way to do it is really old school. Managers and leaders need to be talking about it at least every week, if not every day. So when I talk about author editor and I say, hey, in a perfect world, leaders, you should be in the editor seat 80% of the time and the author seat 20. In that 20%, I don't want you, that's not meant for you to be jumping in, authoring and telling your teams how to do work. That should be when we talk about either strategy and priorities, or we're talking about culture. We're authoring the culture. We're talking about the culture. Instead of jumping in and doing the work for our teams, instead of doing that stuff, let's spend more time talking about culture, because that's going to be more beneficial to our teams. It's going to really help them focus, and it's going to help really create that compelling environment that is good for retaining talent, but it's also really good for retaining customers. So it's talking about it every day. So I'll give you an example. So there is a Ritz-Carlton. It's since been rebranded, kind of pretty close to where I live. But my wife and I used to go there for major events, anniversaries, birthdays. We go there a couple times a year.
Yeah,
it was kind of a treat, and we'd spend the night, and it was great. And one year we went right around 2008, 2009. So the economy, that was when really we had that first really big recession from the real estate bubble and all that kind of nastiness. And we went, and it wasn't very crowded. And what was interesting was everybody we talked to, first of all, it was all the same people. Valet was always the same. Folks working the front desk were always the same. The folks making the omelet was always the same. Making your coffee was always the same. I mean, we knew everybody, and they would know us, even though we only came in a couple times a year.
Yeah.
Well, I would ask them just casually, well, how are things going? And every person said, we need more customers. I'm really concerned. We need more customers. Now, this is the valet saying this. This is the person making the omelet saying this. And normally you don't get that kind of attention to the business at that level in an organization. Most folks at that level, they're just kind of focusing on their own job and what they need to be doing. But these folks were really focused on getting more customers because they really cared about their hotel. And what Ritz-Carlton always would do traditionally was the general manager would hit one of their key principles every day. In the big staff meeting every day, They would have a list of principles and they would take on one. And they'd say, for today, I want us all to think about this principle. So they were keeping it top of mind, front and center every day. And that was helping to create that alignment, that connection, and frankly, that passion for the business. So it doesn't mean we have to talk about that stuff every day, but I would really encourage every leader to start thinking about how we weave that in to our at least weekly meetings. So maybe we grab a value and we talk about it, different value each week, or we just make a nod to those every week, or even you just make sure you put it on kind of the header of your meeting agenda as a reminder, these are our values, just a way to keep it front and center.
I love that. And that's way more engaging than a poster with a cute kitten. But I feel like sometimes we can struggle, right, with remembering these. And I don't know if it's because we sometimes have a tendency to make values come across as cheesy. But if you have a way like that to really get everyone to buy in, and to your point, make it sticky, I feel like that's easier to live those out. And feels like it's interwoven into the company itself, because I'm sure with the Ritz, that got them through a very difficult time until they saw the other end and business started to pick up.
It did. It really did. And all those folks stayed through that difficult time.
Nice.
Where I'd like to take our conversation now is, as we always do in Leadership Foundry Podcast, we try and get very practical. So hopefully everyone listening to this is nodding, going, okay, Brandon, yeah, I got it. We need to do that. I got it. But you're probably, if you're gut level honest with yourself and you're listening to this, you're probably saying to yourself, but I don't even know what our values are. And I'm not even sure if the values we identified in 2015 should be the values that we have today in 2024. So I want to kind of end our time talking about how do you actually start to revisit some of this stuff, pull it off the shelf, dust it off a little bit, and decide, is this really who we are and who we need to be? So to kind of set this up a little bit, why I'm saying this, many moons ago, on the Workplace Therapist show, I had a guest on, and we were talking about culture. This was some years ago, pre-pandemic, and this was a culture researcher, and we settled on this analogy that I think represents culture really, really well. So most folks are listening to this, they can't see me, but if you have had the unfortunate pleasure of seeing me, then you probably know I wear glasses. I've worn glasses since the 4th grade, not even been the 3rd grade. I can't remember. I've always had glasses. Now, what I love about this analogy with glasses is because so every year I get, for those of you who wear glasses, if you're not wearing glasses yet, you will. One day, it's going to catch up to everybody. Nobody escapes glasses. Eventually, it's going to get you. Usually in your late 40s, but could happen sooner. Well, then you'll get an optometrist, and the optometrist will ask you to come back for your checkup every year. I'm not a very good patient. I don't do that. I go about every 3 years, and I get my eyes checked. Perfect analogy for culture. We should be revisiting culture every 3 years, because culture is a lenses we look through. It's how we are taught through our organization, our team, our leaders to look at a problem. Well, whenever we have a problem with a customer, we always value integrity, or we value customer service, or we value quality. It teaches us how to approach a problem. Okay. And situation and context change. It'd be great if we could lock in culture and keep it for 20, 30 years. That's not how it works, because culture should attach to the needs of our customers. And as we know, our customers' needs have changed. And so every 3 years, it's probably good to look at that, because we want our values to match up with not only who we are, but who our customers need us to be. So if you haven't revisited culture in the last 3 years, perfect time to get your eyes checked. Let's check those lenses. So I want to kind of help with adding a few simple steps to visit culture first. Okay. So the first thing you'd want to do is you'd want to come up with a list of values. I have values instruments that I use. You can find lists of values online, but you want to come up with a list of values. And you really want to try and get it to 3 to 5. But most importantly, in the beginning, just really come up with a list of values. What are the values that are really important to you all as a business? Okay. That's step one. Step two, I want you to revisit that list of values and look at it and say, okay, ideally, again, we want no more than 5. So we got to get it down to 5, but we also want to make sure it's the proper balance of operational values and relational values.
Mm.
Okay. And what I mean by that is operational values are things like quality, safety, efficiency. Okay. Those are good, but we don't want all those because you may end up forgetting that that relationships matter. Right. So if I'm always valuing those, I may not give you a lot of grace if you're a colleague of mine. I'm like, this was poor quality and you didn't get it to me very fast. So we want to make sure we're balancing with proper relational values. Relational values might be empathy, compassion, listening, caring. I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of relational values that we could come up with. Trust would be a relational value. Now, you could make it even 50-50. I would prefer you look at your business model and say, in how we do our work, what matters more? The kind of the quality and kind of efficiency of the work, or the relationships we build along the way, or both. And what you'll find is every business, every organization where we're in a business or higher education or healthcare, there's always going to be balance of the both, right? There's one's going to maybe be a little higher than the other, but both are important. Amazon's an extreme example. Relationships really don't matter as much. It's all operational for the most part. So if you go all operational, you're going to be like Amazon, and you're likely going to be competing on price. That's why relational does matter some, okay? Or in my opinion, a lot. Okay, so you want to kind of find that balance. So second step, you look at your list and say, do we have the right mix of operational, relational? And that might mean we want to adjust one way or the other. Because when we first come up with our list of values, we're probably going to identify some things that have been itching for a while that we need to get scratched. You know, maybe you're in a place where you feel like we've kind of lost the value of respect. So you lift up respect. Well, that's great, but make sure that you're also not losing things like efficiency or quality. Okay. So that's our second step. Now, let's say you got your list. You got your list of 5. You feel pretty good about it. You say, Brandon, I like this list. Good. Let's do a litmus test on your list. So I got 3 steps for this to tell if this is the right list or not. First, think about your rock stars. The people in your organization that if you could have 5 more of them, you would in a heartbeat. It's like, I got a Whitney. I want 5 more Whitneys. Okay. You should be able to look at those list of values, take a rock star and say, yep, that's the person. Those values represent this person over here. The list of 5, it looks like Whitney. I mean, that's Whitney. That's exactly what we want. So use your rock stars, grab 3 or 4 rock stars, people that you think are just awesome, that are really helping you win today, and say, do my values represent this person? And if so, we're on the right path. Let's litmus test step 1. Say that 3 times fast. Litmus test step 1. Step 2, now we're going to go the other side of the coin. Last time somebody left because they weren't a good culture fit. So those people, either you exited or they exited themselves. You should be able to grab 1 or 2 of those people as an example and say, point to one of your 5 values and go, that's why. There it is. It was safety. They were a little reckless. It was empathy. They just don't demonstrate the kind of empathy that matters to us in how we do work. Okay. So it should be able to show you that. You should be able to clearly see this is why people were exited, because we want our values to be the real values, not the ones that just go up on the wall, but then there's a hidden set of real values where people can, know how to get, no. We want these to be the real values. And your third, yeah, go ahead, Whitney.
I have a question around that, that you said that, because I am curious. I think that's a beautiful highlight, because I feel like some companies probably do fall in that trap of this is where we want to be versus actually where we are. So how do we navigate that to make sure that it's that true, like, this is what we want to represent versus, because some of it may be like, to your point of, we need to get back to this. So is there a way that we kind of stay on this level playing field of reality to say, this is not what we are, but this is something that we need to add as a value?
Yeah. So what happens with most leaders is because this is a new muscle for them, they tend to go very generic: excellence, service, quality. Okay. Pretty boring, pretty generic.
Yeah.
And typically they're all pretty aspirational. So they go after
Okay.
this aspirational list and they stick it up on the wall. This is who we are. No, no, no. It's who you think we should be. But
Mm.
really, I've seen Devin over there be rude to employees and colleagues, but Devin is our number one salesperson. So no one ever lets Devin, they let Devin get away with everything, even though it says over there respect is one of our values.
Right.
Devin doesn't respect anybody inside the business, but Devin delivers a lot of sales. So we look the other way. So clearly there's a set of real values. And there's the ones on the wall. That's why it's important that we do this litmus test, because we want the values to actually be real. We don't want people to roll their eyes at the values and go, well, Devin's still here and Devin doesn't do respect. In fact, Devin's the opposite of respect. Okay.
Right.
So I think that's it. Now I've given us two important litmus tests, our rock stars. We want more of them. And the other reason why this is so important is if you get the right values that attach to your rock stars and you live that out, who are you going to attract more of?
Those rock stars.
Your rock stars. It's going to make it so easy because you're going to be like, hey, if you like these values, come here. And those rock stars are going to go, yeah, that's where I want to go. I've been to these
and
other
they'll
places.
stay.
And
The
they'll
rock
stay.
Yes.
If they're real, they'll stay. If your values are real, they'll stay. So that's why this matters so much, because it's going to help you attract and keep the people that you want. Okay. And notice, I'm not even talking about pay, because frankly, rock stars, yeah, they care about pay, but they care about a lot of other stuff more than that.
Right.
Okay? They can make money doing lots of stuff. Okay. So then I mentioned our two litmus tests. There is a third. I've hinted at it already. It's actually the most important. What do our customers value today?
Mm.
So we need to ask ourselves, if our customers were in the room with us today and we showed them these list of 5 values, would they say, yes, that's exactly what we need from every experience we have with you, whether we're experiencing your product or experiencing your service? That's what we want from you guys. And if you're not sure, ask a customer out to lunch and say, hey, we've been working on these values. I'd love to get your thoughts, because it matters a lot to us that our culture and that who we aspire to be and who we are meets all your needs. Well, just by that conversation alone, your customer is going to be happy. So it's a great way to even build relationships in the short run and make them contributors and kind of co-owners in your culture. So those are the steps there. If you pass that 3-step litmus test, where we got rock stars, folks that exited, and our customers, and you feel like your values are a good balance of operational, relational, represent your business model well, you're within my kind of very difficult parameter, by the way, of keeping within 5. I'm going to tell you, you're going to really struggle with this, folks. If you haven't tried this, it's really hard. You're going to fall in love with about 7 or 8, and you're going to have to tell some of them no. Okay. And avoid the trap of trying to combine 2, like caringly empathetic, safety with quality always. No, you can't do that. Okay. So then once you got your list, the last step is you need to write a behavioral statement for each one. So what does it mean to practice safety? So our friends that are listening to this right now that work in manufacturing settings, always, any manufacturing setting you touch, safety is always the number 1 value. Now, the problem with most manufacturing settings is there's no number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5 value. It's just safety. And there's a lot of people working on a lot of things. We need more than 1 value, but they over-index on safety. It's important, but there's other values too. But we want to be able to then write out, what does it mean to be safe? What does that look like? Write it out so people know. Make it very concrete and behavioral. And then once you do that, you can start to talk about it. You can start to reward it. You can recognize people, ask for stories, all the good things that really bring culture to life. So that would be, if I was to wave my magic wand and say, what would I want to see for organizations today in 2024? It's this: bring back culture. It's old school, but it's new school. Let's bring it back. And let's really start talking about it. And the starting place really is revisiting, refining, refreshing our values, and bringing them back to life. And of course, we can talk about the other ones too, like vision and purpose, maybe for a later show. But that's where I would love for everyone listening to this today to start to make it a priority.
This is fantastic. I feel like it's very hands-on. It's very practical. And I love all the litmus tests to back these up and make sure we're on the right track. I had one question for you that I think is still a thing. Maybe less so today, but I still think it's a challenge in the workplace, especially when it comes to embodying these values. During the pandemic, a lot of companies went out and they hired employees that are not in their state, not in their town. So there's still a lot out there that are virtual. So they've got like this hybrid makeup, right? Where maybe they have all their local employees are coming back to the office, but they still have a large part that's working from home or they're virtually, just maybe simply because they're not even in the area. How can leaders merge those two together and make that still work?
Whitney, you are so good. You are so good. That is exactly the right question to ask today. I'm so glad you thought of that and so glad you brought it up. So let's talk a little about this. All right. So let's go back in time. March 2020.
Let's not.
Yeah. I remember where I was. I was in San Francisco.
Yeah.
I was about to do a training session for a group on building high performing teams, and the world flipped while I was doing it. And they basically said, "Hey, Brandon, can you do a session on leading virtual teams instead?" So that's what I did. Okay. Now, when we go virtual and we work hybrid, it works really, really great when you've had folks that have already got 3 to 5 years or more of track record working in the culture. So a lot of companies and organizations said, "Hey, this is easy. This is great. Yeah, you got 15-year employees that used to go to the office every day, and you know everybody. You went to lunch with everybody. Now you're just working virtually. Yeah, you are the culture." But for the new folks that you're hiring that don't know the culture, it's a lot. They're not really inoculated with the culture. They don't really have the culture kind of flowing through them like you'd want them to. So it works really well when you got long-term employees. You can do this. That's why running a perfect world, you would reward folks with the ability to work remotely full time or hybrid stuff after they've kind of gotten through experiencing the culture. That's probably not realistic, but it is idealistic. Okay. So now we got hybrid folks. How do you kind of create that culture? Well, first, it's going back to what I said, because we don't have the organic culture stuff that kind of naturally happens. It's not in the air and the water. They're not walking down the halls with a mural with the culture painted on it. They're not walking into a meeting room with one of the values, above the meeting room. They're not seeing it. I remember when I did an internship when I was getting my MBA, I did it between my first and second year. I did an internship at Chick-fil-A in their corporate office. I could tell lots of stories about that. It was a great experience. But I'll tell you, every single person in there, always holding door opens for people. My pleasure, my pleasure, my pleasure. I mean, I got my pleasure to death. I still to this day say my pleasure all the time, all the time, all the time. And that was just 2 months. So it doesn't take long to do it, but that is easy when you're in the office. When you're remote, we have to be intentional. We have to put it into the agenda. So managers have got to make time to talk about it. That's the first thing. It's got to be a regular conversation point. Don't just jump in right into work without first talking about the culture first, because that really guides how we should approach the work in the first place. So we want to talk about that every single meeting, or at least once a week. Have a moment for culture. Okay. CEOs should be sending out quarterly newsletters like they used to, talking about culture, telling a culture story. They should be doing that stuff, particularly when it's a big footprint, organizations, global, or you got a lot of locations. Now that's one. The second is a lot of organizations are doing this, but we've got to create time and space for employees to come together in person. Maybe that's only once a year. Ideally, it'd be more like twice a year, once a quarter. I know it's expensive. Get it? And that's the downside to having a hybrid workforce or folks that working in other states. They're going to have to fly in, hotel costs. But hey, y'all decided to do this, so you're going to have to figure out how to make this work, because you need that time in person. And that's when you really need to be doubling down on culture. Every single in-person event with a hybrid workforce, you need to be thinking in the back of your mind, 50% of this is about them building connections and experiencing the culture. What can I be doing as a leader to reinforce that? Whether it's exercises, experiences, conversations, prompts, whatever it is, this needs to be like a deep culture infusion. So when they go back and they're working out of their home office in Boulder, Colorado, then they're thinking and they're operating out of our culture. So I think those are the two big steps we need to be doing. Creating those, make sure we're really intentional about those in-person experiences as cultural events. And we also need to make sure that we are talking about it at least weekly if we're a manager. And if you're a CEO, 50% of your messaging should be culture. The other 50% should be priorities and strategy. But half of it should be culture. Just like I talk about with author editor, 50% is culture, 50% is strategy and priorities. But that's not what we're seeing today. If CEOs are talking at all, it's not even strategy. It's just priorities. Get revenue up, get costs down. That's easy. I'm sorry. That's easy. That's easy. That's not worthy of a CEO. Anybody can do that. If that's what you're doing as a CEO. You're really missing an opportunity to deliver more complexity. And that's talking about longer term strategy and vision. And that's talking about culture. That's the stuff that's more complex, but it's the stuff that really makes organizations gel and move forward. So those are my 2 cents on it, Whitney.
So good. I agree with you. This is a topic that really needed some attention.
Yeah. Well, thank you for not only asking me some good questions and setting me up, but coming along with the culture ride today.
To that, I must say, my pleasure, Brandon.
Nicely done, Whitney. Nicely done.